Dr. Gil Noam is founder and director of Program in Education and After School and Resiliency, also known as PEAR, at Harvard University. Gil is an associate professor at Harvard Medical School and McLean Hospital, focusing on prevention and resilience. Gil is also a longtime contributor and friend of the after-school movement. He has been a longtime proponent of meeting the social and emotional needs of young people within after-school programs. We could say a lot more about his contributions, but instead, let's invite him to share his thoughts with us. Please welcome Dr. Gil Noam.
I just want to tell you first and foremost that I love being here, and I have a very strong commitment to what happens in California. We all need you and learn from you. This is an incredible moment in history of education and what we just saw in the film, socio-emotional development, and the state is taking yet another time leadership. I also should say that each time I come here, sometimes for long periods, like I've lived here for a year, both of my sons live in this area, so I use every opportunity to come. Thank you, Sam. But every time I come, people are very jealous on the East Coast and say, oh, you're gonna have this great weather. And we have snow. And this is the third time in 12 months that I've come here. I think I'm good for the state. When people have said, we are so lucky it's raining. And I say, yeah, you're lucky, but does it have to be every time I'm here? And not just for a day, but for 3 or 4 days? Well, I'm glad that I'm contributing in some way. I don't want to be too grandiose. It's only correlational, not a causal kind of connection. But that does exist, I have to say. So I have a big program for you in a short period of time. I was just told, nothing like stress, that because the videos ran over, I'm supposed to actually cut my talk by 50%. But I said I can't, so it will be an interesting kind of way to see what happens, whether I'm going to be kind of kicked out from the stage. But I really have like kind of timed it pretty well. So I do have to go faster than I would anyway. So this is the presentation that I want to show you and talk you through. And rather than kind of giving a long introduction, I'll just start right in. And this is a summary of our research. You saw it actually right before on the video, so I don't need to, at this point, go over it in great detail. But we do know a few things. We know that academic achievement, school attendance, and student engagement are really tied to emotional well-being. And that's very important for those of you who are assembled here, because we have known this for so long, but people just didn't listen, right? I mean, this is not new. It is new that we can show the research, but we are in this field as out-of-school time supporters of the educational process of children because that's what we believe in. And we feel like we've been somewhat oppressed, if I can talk for all of us, by this kind of 10 years of having to prove academic success. Everything we had to do was connected to, are the kids really academically growing? There's nothing wrong with it. It was just the oppressive nature of this kind of enterprise. And I think you're extremely lucky to have Michael Funk here and here for a long time, who has actually helped create a whole new agenda which actually allows for academic work to happen without it being the driver. The second component, positive relationships between adult and peers increase resiliency. There's really just no question anymore. There's very good research that shows that. And finally, that the recognition of developmental strengths is as important as the recognition of challenges. And I say as important because I think sometimes we tend to now believe that if we just focus on the assets, we're in good shape. But I think I will try to show you why I think that's a misconception. So here's where I want to get for a moment to the mental health side of things. Because when we talk about socio-emotional development, you saw in the video there was no real mention of mental health issues. And it is very important to recognize that in some ways socio-emotional development and learning is another way of talking also about mental health. And why? Because 1 in 4 children have been exposed to violence, including indirect exposure to family violence and community violence. And by the way, this is not just for urban students. The mental health crisis that keeps kind of in the shadow of the education crisis. Every presidential election has a lot of coverage about the education crisis and very little about the mental health crisis. And I think we need to change that because there's a strong correlation. 1 in 8 children and students have been directly traumatized. So you're a teacher or you're an after-school provider, you just do the math. How many of the students in front of you are either being traumatized as you speak to them, not because you speak to them, that's an important distinction here, but as they go through their lives, right then and there, or have been traumatized, and we know what that does to the safety and security of students. Here is the public health pyramid, and about in urban settings for sure, but I just did a study also in an independent school which was very similar, 30 to 40% of students fall into the second tier, which means they have issues, they're not yet clinical in nature, they don't need a therapist necessarily, but they do have issues. So we now know from neuroscience research that a lot of this is not soft and fuzzy, but really we can see it. We can actually do the studies to show it. And trauma really leads directly to deficits in memory, cognitive impairments, lack of coping responses, poor problem solving, low self-esteem. So when you see a film and people say, let's just give kids the opportunity to learn certain skills such as complex problem solving, and you don't prepare those people who actually convey those strategies to let them know that actually many of those students will need extra support to reach those, we're not going to be sufficiently successful. This is very important. So the good news is, this was the bad news, is that fortunately there is such a thing as neuroplasticity, and there is such a thing as resiliency. And that's very, very important because we really do not have to despair. But it is important to recognize that the after-school settings that we encourage students to be in are actually therapeutic settings. I don't want you to become therapists, but I do want you to recognize that what we do is not only educationally important, but actually provides the safety and experiences that students often otherwise wouldn't have, and it is curative in the sense that it really lays the groundwork for the brain to mature in ways that it needs to mature for students to be successful. So now let's go for a moment to, so what is it if you take a mental health perspective and an education perspective, what really is socio-emotional learning? Because we don't have yet a very good definition. And yet, a lot of resources are being put into this area, and it gives, I think, new meaning to what we do in the out-of-school time field. So one component, this is kind of how I'm thinking about it, and you might agree or disagree, and we could have an interesting discussion. One component are skills that everyone needs to learn in order to be successful in learning and in life. Independently of whether you have a hard life, a good life, a simple life, a complex life, it doesn't matter. You got to learn these skills. So there, the examples, persistence, collaboration, self-management. We just saw in the 2 movies, we saw examples. The second component, when people talk about socio-emotional learning, is actually something about the second tier, and that I would say is resiliency. So again, it's another term that people are using, but it's a different term, and it's important for you to recognize it because Skills, everyone has to learn. Resiliency, everyone should have. It's a great thing. But there is no resiliency without adversity. The term doesn't make sense without adversity. In fact, the good news about resiliency is that it kind of reconsiders adversity as something positive. Artists and other creative people really all describe kind of adversity as a huge motor towards their creativity, right? So that's kind of how we should think about this. Then the third component is the one we just talked about, which is mental health. Their students who we work with have actually succumbed to some of the adversity, whether it's genetic, internal, family, external, doesn't really matter, but we do have to kind of make a distinction between promotion, prevention, and intervention. And that's a big, big issue, and another issue for why after-school programs have to work with schools, because after-school programs and summer programs just don't have enough resources to deal with the mental health issues. Okay, now moving along, I want to actually go, because the topic here is really about the kind of universal, every child needs certain components. So I want to actually suggest to you a model, because I think we do need a model, and I think you saw with some of my colleagues on the video, on the first video, how much of a consensus there is. But we don't have yet a good model that kind of summarizes what is it that we're really striving for. What is it that kids need? What is positive mental health, or what is positive socio-emotional levels of skill? And how can we think about this developmentally? So this is a tour de force. I did this, I should say, after tenure wasn't an issue anymore, because this is the best, what I'm showing you is the best way not to get tenure, which is to be practical and to make things simple. Because the whole point of academia is that you choose a little piece of work and really make that your domain, and you're the world expert in this little domain. That is, I think, one of the reasons why there are like 25 to 1,000 different processes that we can actually make part of this whole issue of socio-emotional development. So what I did was the opposite with a team. We went through the whole literature, interviewed kids, and said, what do the students really need in order to be successful? And we came up with 4 different domains. I wanted to come up with 3 because I wanted to have like the primary colors as like the way to think about this. A little grandiose, I know. But we needed 4, and you can add, you can have 5, 7, or 8 if you want to. I just wanted to have the minimum amount. And so here it is. So the first one is active engagement, which is physical activity, movement, here and now, body, impulse, hands on. So if I apply this, I thought this was a youth development theory. If I apply it to myself at the end of the day, and I want to cheat, so I do it at a certain time when I can still make a difference, I ask myself, did I today breathe? Did I feel anything in my body? Did I even feel my body? Do I even know that I have a body? I'm not even talking about exercise, right? I'm just talking about, okay, so that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. It was interesting in the films to see that a lot of it was mindfulness and meditation, so that fits into there really well. The second one is assertiveness. We are very strong in this in the after-school field. Power, voice, choice, leadership, executive function. The third one is, that doesn't need much explanation. It's empathy, connections, interpersonal awareness, as it was stated before. And the fourth one is self-awareness, understanding others, learning, insight, observation, analysis. So when I kind of think about my day, assertiveness is like, did I today make any decision, or was I just obsessing? And the answer is not every day I make decisions. Obsessing definitely kind of fits into this. Belonging, was I my narcissistic self again today? Or did I actually stop and think about someone who matters, or even someone who doesn't matter in my life, even better, and I thought about the world from their perspective? And the third one, reflection, I think we heard it before, meaning. Heckman talked about the issue of meaning, but in some ways you can translate it into this, did I learn anything today? And actually what you will find is when you have a pretty good balance, not just in a day, but over time, I think that is a good definition of mental health, of positive, productive life. But I want to show you how this is actually a model and how we have to think about this as a model that bridges school, after school, summer, family. Because one of the things that we're spending a lot of time on is the institutional connection between the two. But we're not talking enough about the kind of child-centered, what is the experience of the child bridging these different worlds. And what you have here is actually that this youth development theory, because that is what I think it is actually, and this connects directly to Sam's work and his team's work, is actually a learning theory. Because when you look at how people are supposed to learn, let's say STEM, you will find that I touch, I commit myself to this question, I connect with others, with other peers to actually reflect and make sense of it, and then I sit back and think about it. That is a kind of cycle of learning that is, I think, youth development, academic learning. And then finally, we get to the socio-emotional skills. And I want to spend a little time on that because I know that you have committees at the state level and you have a lot of thinking going right now into the question, what skills should after-school programs and summer programs really embrace? And are they the same as in the school day or are they different? And I think one of my problems, including in the film that we saw before, which was a beautiful film, why those 5 dimensions? Why not 5 other ones? Who says that those 5 are the ones? It's a consensus, but who tells us why that is? Why is there not, for example, creativity as a dimension? Can someone tell me that? I think what we need is a developmental theory that actually tells us what are the key things that kids naturally gravitate to. And then we have to take out of that a kind of set of elements. And here's why I think that, for example, if you take active engagement and you go along with my kind of presupposition that that is what kids really want, and they tell us that, and that is what employers say is necessary, you get from there to self-management, emotion control, because the physicality needs to be controlled, because otherwise little kids, you see it, things are kind of out of control. When you get to assertiveness, the issue of leadership, perseverance, ability to have a voice becomes really critical. Now, this is also connected to an age time. Self-management is critical for the 4, 5, and 6-year-old. If you don't have the self-management skills, the basic ones, you can't function in school, or you can't function out of school time. So that's why I think it's important to say, okay, something is happening there, and that's the developmental point when it happens. Now what we have to do is make sure that it gets updated at different stages of development. So then you have leadership. Then in the middle school years, suddenly the we-go becomes much more important than the ego. Who is, am I in, am I accepted? It's not about identity. People always say, oh, adolescence is about identity. It's very little about identity at that age. It's much more, do I fit in? And that's the moment where I think we have a chance to really expand on the cooperation and the empathy. In fact, before this adolescent phase, empathy is sympathy. You don't really have full empathy because you need perspective taking. And finally, at middle adolescence, you have critical thinking and self-awareness because there you have something about identity. Who am I in life? So this is like a way, I know it's a tour de force, but it's a way to show you that we can go from at different stages of life. Ooh, there are people coming. I told you this is going to be like a titanic struggle over the microphone. No, I am actually going to end now, but I'm going to submit. I'm going to show my belonging abilities, but I hope you can get the sense that we have to redevelopmentalize those skills, because we're going to be much more successful to train them and to make them happen if we understand the basic natural architecture of how young people develop. And when we do that, and my hope is really to kind of help and support the work that is happening here so this can work, because when you actually, the sad thing about schooling is when you take those 4 clover leaves, schools don't like bodies, especially in adolescence, because they're aggressive and sexual. So Boston doesn't have any, for middle schoolers, any time for them to play. It's too dangerous. 20 minutes for lunch, that's it. But that's, of course, different here. But leadership and perseverance, there's very little leadership opportunity for young people in schools that really matter. Belonging, it's so-so. Teacher-student relationships are okay, but they're so-so. And reflection works well. So why do you think it should be successful? Why do you think that schooling should be successful if 3 of the 4 critical elements are not happening? So I want to end with what I had a few things that I was going to use for the discussion, not for you right now, because what I wanted to do, if there would be time, is to show you that this can all be measured, and it can be measured not as punitive measurement, accountability measurement, but an engagement of young people to tell us their story by filling out certain things that we can then use and track. And that's a really important kind of piece of really having a whole new way of thinking about data that I hope we can really embrace, because we need data, but we shouldn't let the data be, punitive. And so I want to end with the voice of a child. This is a photography group that we do in after-school programs, but we call it Photo Justice. It's about students actually telling us what they're upset about. They always talk about it's unfair, it's unfair. So we say, okay, so show us what's unfair. And so what we have here is this image, and we have a young person, her name is Maya, and she says, many young children have passed on. They become beautiful angels. Honestly, they leave shadows all over the world with these peaceful doves. Thinking of a shadow over a dove on a sidewalk represents a beautiful soul that was harmed. I'm Maya. I'm 13 years old. I took a picture of Jamal's shadow over a dove. Innocent souls dying. I don't like violence or death. The reason why I'm showing you this is manifold. First of all, this is deep learning. And this is school and after-school learning and summer learning. It doesn't matter where it happens. This is meaning making in front of us. This is artistic because the child is really having a chance to use pictures. And very importantly, this is interpersonal. And in addition to that, it's about mental health and safety. It's like traumatic experiences. These doves are painted on the sidewalks in Boston wherever there was a rape or a murder. So this is really, really meaningful. And it is what I think we're all talking about, like the courage to engage with students on a level that others really shy away from, to do it in a way that is loving and accepting and caring, but also a way that pushes them towards a kind of developmental embracing of socio-emotional skills. That is what we're talking about. I think we're not just talking about a bunch of skills and lists of skills. We're talking about engaging students and getting to the lives of students at a really deep level. And if we do that, I think we will have a totally different kind of emotional, educational experience, and we will have the students really be, even the most difficult students, be our partners. Thank you.